Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from an incredibly cold Central Florida Messy Time Studios, broadcasting as ever from the last free state in America. Joining me from across the country is Benjamin Slivka, who, among other things, which we'll get into, celebrated his 16,000th day of wedded bliss a few days ago. So that's a milestone. Ben and I got to know each other via writing on Substack. And as I'm going to repeat here, the best definition I've yet to hear of an intelligent person is someone who agrees with you. So, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show. How you doing today?
Well, my goal during our time together is to find several things which we disagree about, because I think that'll be more fun to talk about.
That would be more fun to talk about.
Yes. Early this morning, so that we would be in good fettle here. Went out to my local coffee shop where sometimes I see Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates, because they're in the hood here. So I live on the east side of Seattle. It's drizzling right now, so Seattle is maintaining its character. I think it's about 47 degrees and cold and dark and damp and wet.
Beautiful.
On the first day of February. So
I do recall very briefly, because I did some work in Redmond with Microsoft and the cybersecurity research group years ago, and one of the guys told me that they do all of next year's initial hire recruiting in July. So they bring everyone out for 2 weeks. They have all the college kids hang out in Seattle in July for 2 weeks when it's all sunshiny and lovely, and they go sailing on the harbor.
That's a neat story. So I joined Microsoft on June 24th, 1985. And that's long enough ago that we had not shipped Windows 1.0 yet. Windows shipped that fall in November. And so my interview day, so I sent Microsoft my stuff and they flew me out. And so I woke up on February 1st of 1985. I'm not kidding you. It's sort of coincidental now that I think about it that we're talking today. And there had been, 6 or 8 inches of snowfall here in the greater Seattle area. I was staying with my parents who lived in the Mount Baker neighborhood. I had a red rental car, and so I drove over to Bellevue to go interview through the snow. And I'd lived in New York for a year, and I'd lived in Evanston for a year, so I was used to cold and snow and driving. So now we have hills here in the Seattle area, which they don't really have in Chicagoland, right? Anyway, so basically the roads were empty, and I got to Microsoft, and they scrambled to put together an interview schedule, and I did all my interviews. My final interview, what we called an as appropriate interview, was with Gordon Letwin, and he was number 8 employee at Microsoft. He's the very bushy bearded guy in that classic 1979 Microsoft picture.
Awesome.
Anyway, and so that at the end of the day, I got a job offer, and it was $30,000 or $32,000. Salary and 2 weeks of vacation and stock options to buy 1,500 shares of Microsoft at $3 a share. And my recruiter, Joanne Rahal, said, we think these might be worth $20,000 or $30,000 someday.
Great. She was wrong, but but still,
by only 2 orders of magnitude. But anyway.
2 orders of magnitude, but that's okay. That's all right. That's huge. And so, what was the biggest thing you learned? You'd been at IBM prior to Microsoft, right?
3 days shy of a year.
And what was the big switch away from Big Blue to this pre-IPO Microsoft thing?
All right, so let's run our minds back to the 70s and 80s. So I joined IBM right out of school, not knowing really anything about corporate culture. They were the computer company in a way. If you look at sort of Microsoft and Google today, maybe IBM kind of had that kind of footprint, if you want to think about it that way.
Right.
So I get to IBM, and the security guards will sweep the building at 7 p.m. and kick you out, and you can't work on weekends. And this is the era of 3270 terminals, which are very heavy, and 300 baud modems. And so there was no idea of remote work. And so a couple weeks after I'd started, my 3rd line manager, who'd been demoted from a 5th line site manager, IBM were very focused on these rankings and things, pulled a sheet of comments out from my interviews when I'd interviewed at IBM in I think January of 1982. And so this is late June or early July of 1982. And he reads off these comments that people are smart and he knows it, doesn't suffer fools lightly, and all these things. And then he says, Ben, you really should cool it. Right. And so that was my first clue that I was in the wrong place.
Right. So I should be dumber, or I should not point out people's flaws or problems and reasons.
All those things.
All those things. We don't do that here, but that's a nice shirt.
Yeah. And so Lisa and I had gotten married in April, just before I graduated. She had 2 more years of school. So she'd transferred to Vassar. So we had to kind of stay for the year. And so we went back to Northwestern. I got a full-time job at the Mainframe Computing Center, where they still had a Control Data Corporation mainframe. I think maybe they had a VAX by that time. And so I got
Control Data Corp. That takes me back. Good God.
I can tell you stories about Compass. And so anyway, I was working on a master's in computer science part-time, and the Macintosh was announced in spring of 1984. So we bought a Macintosh, which is horribly underpowered compared to anything you can imagine today. And I bought a copy of Microsoft Word for the Macintosh to write my master's project report. And that's how I ended up at Microsoft the next year.
That's killer. I remember I had the Mac, the 512K. It was great. I did everything I needed to do at the time. And I had started out with an Apple II Plus when I was small. So I was there for those early days. And what was the biggest kind of cultural change when you went from? Well,
so I joined Microsoft. There was less than 800 employees. As I said, it was still privately held. No one knew what a stock option was. Now the IPO was 9 months after I started, and the closing stock price, the stock had split 2 for 1. The closing price was around 30. So my $4,500 worth of stock options were now worth $90,000. Right. Now they weren't vested yet, so and the price kept going. So basically, at IBM there were 2 or 3 smart people in 100. The managers were all CYA, and it seemed like just hard to get anything done. And at Microsoft, they're just like, go get stuff done. And so we were doing source code control on a DEC mainframe running our Xenix Unix-like software, and we were doing FTP over 19.2 serial lines to send code up to check in and then to download it later. And the group next to us is doing MSNet, which was a local area networking software. And so I bought 2 servers, and I hired some contractors to wire network cables, and I bought network cables for the 20 or 30 people in the multitasking DOS team. And so you could just do things like that, right? You could just say, hey, I see a problem. I'm just going to go solve it. And so I installed the first production LAN at Microsoft. I mean, as having been there 3 months or so.
That should be on a T-shirt.
Yeah, well, I did other things that were even more outrageous than that.
But a little ones, like my grandpa installed the first LAN at Microsoft.
But of course, we don't even have LANs anymore, right? Everyone has cellular data, and if you're at home, you have a cable modem or something with a Wi-Fi access point. And so nobody puts LAN cables in anymore.
Nope. I've still got a bunch of them sitting in a pile off to the side, actually, wondering what on earth I should do with them. Surely there's value in this. No. Unless I get some antiquated equipment I need to reconnect.
Yeah. Very good. So let me tell you about some things I worked on at Microsoft. So the most high profile thing I did was Internet Explorer. And so I started that team in October 94. I gave Mark Andreessen a 6-month head start with his Netscape Navigator. And in 23 months, we caught up and passed him.
Yeah.
And so we did IE1 and IE2. They had basically no market share because Netscape was better. IE3 was the first browser with CSS. We had a bunch of other goodies. And so it got to 30% market share.
My friend CSS for the uninitiated?
Oh, sorry. Cascading style sheets. That's the feature in HTML web pages where you can specify fonts and colors and layouts and all sorts of visual display characteristics.
Right.
So that was a World Wide Web Consortium standard that we were the first to implement. Anyway, so then my friend Adam Bosworth took over and did IE4. So IE3 shipped August 1996. IE4 shipped August 1997. IE4 was the first web browser to support what we call dynamic HTML. So that's the ability for the JavaScript code running in the browser to manipulate the HTML on the page and make things look very interactive. And so that's why you can now make and for years you've been able to make a web page that looks like a Windows app or a Macintosh app, right? Because you've got that feature. So
that's where you really blew past Netscape. And
we went from 30%. We were passing 60% usage in May of 1998 when the largest monopoly in America, the federal government, sued us for antitrust, which I thought was pretty hubris. Anyway, so there was the whole antitrust thing. So I worked on MS-DOS version 6 in 1992-93. That was the last version. We sold $1 billion worth of retail upgrades at $50 a pop. So basically, there was one floppy disk in a cardboard package with a nice glossy cover on it, and people paid $50. So like 20 million some people bought a copy of MS-DOS 6. So that was kind of fun.
That's a big update. What quickly or not quickly, whichever, on the whole antitrust issue. What are kind of your views on that? It's how it evolved. Was the pace of commercial change making it pointless by the time you got to the end of it? Like, what were your general overall thoughts?
So I've done some more research on antitrust and history since then. So basically, politicians and bureaucrats and government regulators are impatient. And so it's true
that's one adjective. I would have chosen a different one.
Well, I'd be polite.
Again, we're looking for points of disagreement, so I can't find it.
There we go. Go ahead. So Internet Explorer went from no usage, and Netscape was the dominant web browser, to 93% usage share.
Right.
And that's because we were on Windows and we were on Macintosh. Those were the two dominant computing platforms. And then Mr. Ballmer, in his wisdom as CEO, abandoned the Macintosh version of Internet Explorer. And when Android came along, when iOS came along with the iPhone, Microsoft did not port Internet Explorer to those two new mobile platforms, which, as you can imagine, have much higher penetration than desktops and laptops.
Yep.
And so Internet Explorer died. And so it went from temporary high market share because it was the best browser to now Chrome has the posture and usage.
And did the government's wasting that's a loaded question. Did the government spending millions of taxpayer dollars on this supposed monopolistic behavior do anything?
Well,
negative or positive?
That's the only time our federal government has ever wasted your taxpayer dollars.
We found our point of disagreement. I could think of millions of examples.
Maybe we have sarcasm out here in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know. That's maybe hasn't migrated.
Central Floridians, we're not smart enough for sarcasm. We don't get that. Or irony. We missed that entirely too.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at the history of antitrust, I mean, the most famous antitrust case is Standard Oil. Standard Oil, in when it had very temporary high market share, reduced the cost of petroleum by a factor of 20.
Yep.
And
made it safer, made it standard. So it wasn't dangerous for people using it.
All of those things.
Yep.
And they got sued and their market share, they were 99% market share in the early days. Their market share was down to 91% and falling by the time the United States Supreme Court upheld the breakup. Right. And so this is why I think patience is the most important word to say when you talk about antitrust. If you're just patient, competitors would come in. If people claim, oh, my God, the monopolist is charging high prices, well, that creates a price umbrella for competitors to come in. So
how dare you? That sounds like you believe in free choice.
I've been to 58 countries outside America, and people do come to America for freedom and opportunity.
Yes, they do. There's a great old Buddhist saying, which is, if you sit by the river long enough, the body of your enemy will float by. And similarly with most of these governmental interventions, by the time the wheels of injustice, the judicial system, grind through their process, the original thing that they've complained about is gone or dying anyway. And then, of course, like good politicians, they declare victory. Look what great stuff we did for you. Fair enough.
Anyway, so to wrap up my Microsoft stuff, so I also worked on Windows 95. That was a very popular operating system. My early first 5.5 years were OS 2. Nobody, hopefully, on your audience knows what that is. And so by the time it was 1999, instead of, Microsoft was had grown by a factor of about 40, so less than 800 people to over 32,000. Yeah. And I'd hired about 120 people in that span, so I figured I did 3x my duty in terms of hiring folks. And so it was time to do something else. And so I was an early Amazon customer. I bought books for my wife as a present in December 1995, and so I was customer 10,272 at Amazon, which I know because I went and worked at Amazon for 9 months.
You got to see your statistics. Where am I in here? That's great.
So
who was number one? Was it Jeff?
It never occurred to me to look that up.
That'd be a fun question. Who were the first 10? Were they all like, neighbors of his?
Right. Family members. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so I joined Amazon in September 99 and took on a real job in January of 2000. So, 26 years ago. So I had half of all the software engineers at Amazon working for me in the first half of 2000, which was only about 167 people because it was a 5-year-old company. So
right.
Really neat. I had everything that was not the website. So supply chain and distribution center software and customer service software and all the package finance, HR, legal stuff. Okay. Only one problem.
Let me guess.
Jeff Bezos.
El Jefe.
Right. Anyway, and so he was making a lot of mistakes. Obviously, none of them were fatal because obviously Amazon is still around.
Well, it worked out.
He's a gazillionaire, but it made my life basically miserable, and so it was hard for me to do the job correctly with the things he wanted me to do. So, and he was just, I joined in September. In November, he was Times Man of the Year. He's a billionaire founder. I'm just the new hired guy.
Right.
And my kids were 8, 6, and 4. I'm like, Jeff, I think I'll let you keep doing this. And anyway, so that was my last, my last paid employment.
Fantastic. And what have the intervening years been filled with? What do you mainly do?
Okay, that's good. So, raising children does take some amount of time. And
my wife says so.
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah. So there was feeding and driving and other stuff. Yeah. I was a trustee at my university, Northwestern University, for 20 years. So I joined the board in 1998 and stepped down in 2018. I started traveling pretty extensively in 2014. So I'd been to a handful of countries before that, but I've been to Africa 7 separate times. I've been all over Europe. I've been to all of Indochina. I've been to India twice, China twice. I've been some obscure places, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Burma, Bhutan, Mongolia. So anywhere.
What was your impression of Bhutan? Everyone I know has been there tells me I desperately need to go. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe. What do you think?
Well, it's adjacent to Nepal.
Yeah.
And it's less than 1 million people, and it's a pretty mountainous country, as you might imagine. They're on King 5 now, and so every once in a while I get to do a non-touristy thing. So when I was there, I had dinner with Dasho Benji, who you Google Dasho Benji, like who's this guy? You can't figure it out, but he's senior advisor to Kings 3, 4, and 5, and so his grandfather. The British and the Indians insisted that the princes of Bhutan pick a king. And they had just had princely territories and there was no uber prince.
A unifying king, right?
Yeah. And so Dasho Benji's grandfather helped pick King 1. And then the kings have some names, but they're complicated. I don't remember them. So King 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Dasho Benji was 72 years old. We sit down to dinner the last night before we're leaving. He announces he's an alcoholic, and but we can have a bottle of wine if we want. And he's got this lovely lilting British accent. He was born in Darjeeling, where the tea comes from.
That's fantastic.
When it was still part of Bhutan, but then the Indians carved it off. Right. Anyway, and so he was sent to the UK military academy because they thought he was going to be the Secretary of Defense, but he ended up being this senior advisor, Kings 3, 4, 5. And so he has a radio show. He's really interested about this particular species of bird that he's protecting. And so we had this fascinating conversation, which not every tourist of Bhutan gets to do. But they have strict requirements about how the buildings look, so they maintain the traditional look. So you're not going to see steel, concrete, glass, kinds of buildings. And you're required. There's a $250 a day tax that you're required to pay as a tourist, and that gets you a car and a driver. And so you've got your car and driver buddy who take you around everywhere.
See, occasionally you do get what you pay for. That's
yeah,
okay.
yeah, exactly.
That's a good deal.
Well, and strangely, there's a guy that died recently here in Seattle, but who was big in the tourism industry, and he was the one who apparently gave King 3, I guess, the idea to do this, to make it a more upscale kind of experience. And so, we did day hikes every day. We went and saw the Eagle's Nest, which is up on this temple up on the mountainside, and so it was a lovely experience. Now they only have exactly 7 kinds of foods in Bhutan, so it's actually a good weight loss strategy.
That's excellent. So you just get tired of the cuisine, you're like, I'm good. I'll wait till lunch.
Yeah, we did have a few exotic things, but yeah, mostly it was so good.
Awesome. So here's the thought. And we when we set up this podcast, it was originally in the midst of the Wuhan fakedemic, for which we got mightily censored all over the place for eventually being proven right. But so what? What are you seeing? I mean, you've got a perspective, the American executive, and then retiree.
I'm just a nerd who happen to sometimes have a few people working for me.
We're touchy about the term nerd on the show, but that's about
really?
It's okay if you self-identify. Who are we to?
No, I mean, look, here are my bona fides. I built plastic model airplanes in the 1960s, mostly World War II bombers and fighters. And I built some balsa wood models. I bought a book on cryptanalysis, which is to say code breaking, in 1969 as a 9-year-old. Now, I can't say I understood the sigma and all the math and that kind of stuff, but I was interested in that. I built 50 model rockets, most of my own design, ages 12 to 16. So that's 1972 to 76. Then I took this programming class with Fortran 4 and punched cards and green bar paper and 3-day turnaround time. And so I was going up to in University of Washington. So I got an account in the University of Washington's Computing Center in 1976 as a 16-year-old. And so I spent $3,000 on computer time.
That's awesome.
Right. I was.
Quick question. What's your general impression or your thoughts, having been there and being a native? What is the biggest change you've seen in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest since those days, since the 70s?
Well, you pay attention to different things at different ages, I think. So Microsoft, founded in 1975, moved back home. Paul and Bill had grown up in Seattle in 79. So Microsoft's a big change.
Yeah.
Amazon's a big change. Costco is a big change. Starbucks is a big change. I'm old enough to remember when there was exactly one Starbucks store at the Pike Place Market. Most of the California tech companies, Google and Meta, et cetera, have big engineering offices up here. So that's been a really dramatic change. On the political front, you see all the horror stories about Seattle or some of these other cities. I mean, I've walked around Seattle and Boston and Philly and New York and Chicago and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Austin, Texas and Washington, D.C. And so I would say, I was sort of ignorant of and uninterested in politics when I was growing up. And if you look at things now, there's a lot of stuff that's, how can I say this gently, unsatisfactory, in some of these cities. And, here's a crazy story. So I was in Kenya for 2 weeks in February, March of 2022. And the last day, the airplane flights usually to go back to Europe usually don't leave till around midnight. So we got to Nairobi in around 10 a.m. in the morning. And we had a dinner with some local young women who were doing some media stuff. And then we had this late flight. And so I text them, hey, would it be safe for me to take an Uber into central business district of Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, and walk around for a few hours? They said, sure, no problem. And so I went and did that. White guy, Hawaiian shirt, big ass camera. I got my hiking boots on because we climbed up to Mount Kenya to 16,000.
So you blended in perfectly.
Blended in perfectly. Yeah, I saw in 3 hours of walking around, I saw 2 non-black faces out of the whole thing. And this is early March 2022. So the pandemic is kind of still on. It's in the temperatures are in the 80s. Guys are wearing suits and ties and masks outside. That was pretty interesting. I didn't see a single drug-addled homeless person in Nairobi, the capital city of this very poor country. Per capita GDP is less than $3,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's fast forward to that fall in November. I'm in DC for a conference. I like to walk around. I mean, I walked a little over 9 miles yesterday here in the wilds of greater Seattle. Anyway, so I'm walking around DC and I see homeless encampments
Everywhere.
In sight of the White House, in sight of the Washington Monument, right? And so it's amazing. Here's a very poor country that people have pride or self-discipline or something, right? And here's one of the most prosperous countries in the world with, I just leave that there.
Yeah, well, what Kenya also has is a task-driven police force and a lack of liberal whiners who complain about them.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's part of it. I worked throughout northern, central, and southern Africa for years, and I've lived there multiple times. And in some ways, it's very strange, especially being like in Zimbabwe, places like Morocco, Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
I generally, as a foreigner, by default wealthy, whether I am or not, had far more kind of rights and privileges than most locals did. And that's just the decision on behalf of the government to make sure that nothing bad ever happens to the tourist dollars.
Right? I see. Okay. Yeah.
I remember lived in Morocco and I lived in Fes El Bali, which is the old city.
Yeah.
Which of course is very heavily tourist.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was going to wear my fez for this.
Yeah. Which is actually an Egyptian hat, funnily. I remember numerous occasions where we would kind of save naive young tourists for, acting stupidly. Excellent. Looks very becoming. But there were multiple times where, especially young women who kind of didn't understand that they were not particularly in kind of grave physical danger, but especially if they had blonde hair, they were going to get pawed at for the novelty of it. But of course, it could be very startling and scary because you don't know what's going on. So we would often kind of brush locals off.
What I found is when you walk around in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, people don't know what to make of you in other countries, and so they think maybe you're crazy. Maybe they don't really.
Easier to assume that.
Let's come back to the pandemic stuff. So
yeah, please. What were your impressions when did you know it was a scam, or did you never know?
That's a leading question.
It is a leading question, but we're trying to find something to disagree about. So I'm going
lacks foundation. So David Baker is a research scientist here at the University of Washington in Seattle, and he runs the Institute for Protein Design. And he started working on the protein folding problem back in 1997. And so in the fall of 2024, he and two of the DeepMind folks who built AlphaFold were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Okay, right. So that sets the stage. So we were looking for new things to support at University of Washington back in 2013. So my wife and I met David Baker. It turned out he was 2 years behind me at Garfield High School here in Seattle. Right. But I didn't remember him, and I don't think he remembered me. So anyway, and then in 2015, I was his chief volunteer fundraiser. UW had a big campaign. And so he raised $153 million against an $85 million goal. So anyway, so I started, because I was helping with that fundraising, I started reading on molecular biology. And the most powerful history of science book I've ever read was published in 1979. Horace Judson was the author. The title is The Eighth Day of Creation, a pretty clever title.
That's good.
And and so the chapters are DNA, RNA, proteins. And he went around and spent 10 years interviewing 111 researchers, probably half of whom have now received Nobel Prize, and transcribed over 1 million words of interviews. And so I read that, and I bought the book in 2014, and I forgot about it. And then the pandemic was on in 2020. And so I read that book. I read a bunch of other books. So the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, right? The KISS principle would say you've got a virology lab in Wuhan, China. They were doing research on coronaviruses, and there was an outbreak of this coronavirus, and then a lot of people died. So the KISS answer would be it happened there, right? I mean, that's like you'd have to do a lot of work to prove that was not the case, right?
That is the simplest explanation, right?
Now, I saw some stuff recently where in September 2019, 3 things happened at that lab. The first thing was that the government took it over, maybe the military, I think maybe. The second thing was they ordered a lot of new biosecurity equipment. And the third thing they do is they destroyed a lot of records, right? And so that was September of 2019.
How convenient.
Well, I know it just, anyway. So sadly, if the Chinese Communist Party hadn't been so interested in preserving their reputations, right, they would have clamped down on it early, and there would be many, many, many fewer lives lost, right? And if you look at, so do you remember the Great Barrington Declaration from October?
Yes, I was one of the first 1,000 signatories. I wish I'd been earlier.
Right. I asked people, and no one's heard of it, and no one's heard of it because Fauci and Francis Collins at NIH conspired to suppress that.
Now they're losing their minds because Jay Bhattacharya is in the government, and everyone's running scared. I mean, to me, Fauci should be in a jumpsuit, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway,
yes. I think that all available evidence suggests.
I'm not a big fan of weaponizing the judiciary for political decisions, but in this case, they were awful. He and the rest of them.
Anyway, so what I can observe, having been reading on molecular biology for the last 11 years, is that there's a lot of stuff we don't know. We don't know how many human genes there are. We don't know how many RNA splicing zones there are. We don't know how many distinct human protein isoforms there are. I mean, there's a shit ton of stuff we don't know. Yeah. One of the things that's a fascinating takeaway from this 1979 book, The Eighth Day of Creation, is that there were a lot of things people thought were true that turned out not to be true. And Francis Crick and James Watson, when they were trying to figure out the structure of DNA, they wrote to themselves and told themselves repeatedly that we should start from as few facts as possible when we try to prove the structure, because any one of those things could be false.
Right.
And so we still have that problem today, and mostly because our instrumentation is shitty. And so if you fab a 3 nanometer chip at TSMC in Taiwan, I can use a scanning tunneling electron micrograph, and it's like 435 process steps, something insane like that. But at each step, I can take the silicon out and I can scan it and verify at a 3 nanometer resolution that I built the thing I thought I built.
Right.
And that you can do that because it's static. Right. Okay. Yep. The problem with life is not static. Life is moving. Right.
and it wiggles.
So we don't have Ben's magical video camera.
Right.
It's magical because it doesn't exist and possibly can't be made, although I got a D in that physics class, so I'm not sure if I know really authoritatively that. So Ben's magical video...
It's an extremely complicated problem, but I imagine it is. There is an analog to be built in biology, but it would take a lot of computation and a lot of AI.
Let me tell you the specs on my magical video camera. So it has a 100 megapixel sensor. Each pixel resolves 1/10 of an angstrom and has a 10,000 frame per second frame rate. Okay. If you had Ben's magical video camera, you could watch DNA being transcribed. You could watch RNA splicing zones come apart and reassemble. You could watch a string of RNA going through a ribosome in your cell and spitting out a chain of amino acids. And you could watch that collapse to its folded protein structure with whatever post-translation modification occurs. And so if you had that magical camera, we could actually know precisely what happens. But we don't. And so what instead we do is we tag stuff and we infer all sorts of stuff. And anyway, so biology is the thing we as human beings know the least about. And on top of that is that we know the least about the brain, because the brain is a biological device. So,
Interesting. Fair, yeah. No, I
See,
can
I'm
see all.
unemployed, so I get to think about these things.
Yeah, no, that was just the greatest thing ever. The the what I found so well, I don't know, fascinating at this point is, I guess, is adequate adjective, is the political and sociological response to basically a bad seasonal flu, wherever it came from. That was what I found so completely insane. And that's what everyone who signed the Great Barrington Declaration put their names to. Like, this is madness. I remember and I got thrown off Twitter. I got thrown off everywhere for just relaying this. Right. In October of 2019, my daughter in high school came down with some bizarre respiratory ailment that she just couldn't quit. 35% of her school was out sick. Right. So it was here already. They just hadn't identified it yet.
Yeah.
Right. For daring to just report what you could objectively prove to be true, I was spreading medical misinformation.
Yeah.
Right. And then there was that cruise ship that came in, and there was Stanford epidemiologist wrote a paper about that.
Yeah.
I quoted that, and I calculated an all-population survival rate of 98.98%, which proved to be correct, right? It proved to be correct because the Italians went crazy first, and I got all the stats directly from Padova and Milano, where they were the National Institutes of Health. We're reporting, and I'm reading these statistics as the world is screaming, and Fauci is, Fauci, who was eternally wrong about HIV and a billion other things, that clown, is screaming about how we've all got to stop the world so we can get off.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the stats. I'm like, the average age of death is 91 for women, 89 for men, all of whom had pre-existing chronic ailments. That used to be called life. Right? The influenza, as you know, used to be called the old man's best friend. You weren't doing so well. You were getting weak. You were declining. Flu season came. You didn't make it. We all mourned Grandpa. Right? That's how life used to work.
Yeah.
This was the first time in history where adults demanded. They basically, in my mind, the boomers sacrificed children on the altar of their own longevity. Right, we're going to close schools. We're going to delay all this crap. We're going to teach kids the value of sacrifice. Real adults don't teach children the value of sacrifice. They fucking sacrifice themselves. That's the point. The whole thing enraged me.
So let me say the following thing.
Podcast.
Let me say the following thing, and then I want to switch on to answer your question about what else I'm spending time on. So a thing we have not done in America is had a 9/11 commission for COVID.
Yeah.
And so my comment is, it must be the case that both the D's and the R's think they would be found culpable. In such an investigation, and so we haven't done that. So it strikes me as imprudent at best that we have not done that post-mortem analysis. And so now let's move on. So
spot on. And the reason the Dems don't want it is it would guarantee that Ron DeSantis become president instantly, because he was the only one who was like, this is all crap. I'm getting statistics from my health office. What are you, nuts? Anyway.
Well, I'm an independent voter, so I watch these things with some mixture of sadness and chagrin. So
that's a good way to watch them.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, what's the other thing?
So I started investing in technology startup companies in 2003. And so in that span of time, I've probably talked to over 300 entrepreneurs. I've invested in 20 separate companies. I've been an advisor for longer stretches of time for, 3 or 5 or 6 companies, something like that. So this is angel investing. That's what they call it. And so I've had 7 failures. One wash result was a company, Dreambox Learning, that I started in 2006. I sold it to Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, at a loss in 2010. I got all my money back 15 years after founding the company, which is better than losing money, which I've done 9 times. And I've had 3 nice wins. And so I got 9 companies still going, 3 in biotechnology, starting from 5, 2 hardware companies, 3 software companies, and a rocket launch company. So I want to make sure we have some positive discussions here in
Yes.
and among looking at some of these other things. So I remain optimistic about America, about humanity, about the world. We've made tremendous progress with technology. Now, you can use a steak knife to feed yourself, but you can also slit someone's throat. So any technology you make have good uses and bad uses. Yeah, dual use. So let me tell you about a couple of the startups. The rocket launch company Stoke Space Technologies was founded here in Seattle area in 2019. And I met the founders, Andy and Tom, in 2020, asked all my nerdy rocket questions and wrote them a check. And fast forward to today, they announced their Series D funding in October last year. That was $510 million, bringing their total funds raised to $990 million.
Fantastic.
And so there's a podcast called Everyday Astronaut that they posted a 87-minute interview with the CEO, co-founder Andy in December. And so Andy promised to get to orbit this year on a high energy flight, which I think means they're not worried about recovering the first or second stages. And it's possible the second stage might leave orbit, but I'm not exactly sure about that. And I haven't pestered Andy. He's busy trying to build a rocket. So if they get to orbit this year, that'll be from starting the company to orbit is about 7 years. And Blue Origin took almost 25 years. SpaceX got to orbit in 8 years. And so you might ask, well, you got SpaceX doing 166 Falcon 9 launches last year. They passed the 600 launch count for Falcon 9 last year. Blue Origin is making some progress. You have Rocket Labs. There's a bunch of places. So what's special about Stoke? Well, what's special about Stoke is their ambition is to have their rocket fly every day and fly 100 times. And so that's a crazy goal because that's durability, and that means you don't need to inspect or repair the rocket after every flight. By contrast, Falcon 9, which is by far the most successful launch vehicle ever made by human beings, Falcon 9, on average, the booster flies once a month, and on average, it only flies 10 times.
Right.
Now that's way better than anyone else has done. But that turnaround time is they have to inspect and repair the booster, and they don't have a reusable second stage. Anyway, and the second stage for the Stoke rocket has an actively cooled metal heat shield. And so they run the liquid hydrogen propellant through this metal butt during reentry to shed the heat, and then it gets to land on its jets. And so that both stages will be able to fly every day eventually. Not you have to work your way up to that. All right, so that one's pretty exciting.
I love that. I'll tell you why, because we are interested in everyone building the space railroads, because my day job is mining on the moon. So all we care about is how many different companies there are going to be for me to rent Uber space on.
Absolutely.
The more the merrier. I look forward to learning more about Stoke because there's another entrant band. I hope they get where they're going, because that means that my rates are going to come down. So I'm excited about that.
And their goal, they estimate that they'll be able to reduce the cost of mass to orbit by as much as a factor of 10.
Then if they get half the way there, I'm in love with them.
Right.
I'm a customer.
Okay, that's one. All right. The second one is a company called Atomic Machines, and they're down south of Berkeley in Emeryville, California. They're still in stealth mode, so I have to be a little more careful what I tell you about that. But they're inventing a new manufacturing process to make MEMS devices. And if they're successful,
for the uninitiated, a MEMS device.
Say it again.
For the uninitiated, a MEMS device.
MEMS stands for micro electrical mechanical systems. So an example would be here's your smartphone. This is my Google Pixel 11 Pro XL Platinum Edition. I mean, they keep on adding words.
The special Emerald Sparkle Edition.
Exactly. So there's a MEMS microphone up here, right? A loud speaker here, right? There's a microphone down here. There's a 9-axis accelerometer, so it can measure acceleration in all axes. Maybe there's some other components, and so they're focusing on the highest volume, sales volume device that's currently sold and manufactured. A few 100 million of these devices are made and sold every year, and these MEMS components. And so they're focusing on that. And so there's some hard problems. This one device has to have a mean time to failure of 20 years. And so how do you prove to your customers in less than 20 years that your brand new device manufactured with your brand new special manufacturing process?
I swear it's going to make it.
Exactly. Anyway, so that's one. Of the three biotech companies, one of them is called TwinStrand. They have a technology that reduces the error rate of gene sequencing from 1 in 100 typically base pairs to 1 in 10 million. And so everyone learned about PCR tests. Do you know what PCR stands for?
I do not.
Okay, it's called polymerase chain reaction. It's a chemical heat cycling process. So DNA is double-stranded. So this PCR process rips it apart, causes the other matching strands to get regrown, and then repeats. And so it's an amplification process. And so if you have a small sample of DNA, you do this and you get a bigger sample of DNA. That PCR process introduces errors, and then you fragment it, you run it through an Illumina gene sequencer, and that also introduces errors. So if I'm asking, does Chris have COVID? 99% accuracy is plenty good enough.
Right.
But if I'm taking a blood sample from Chris and asking, does Chris have cancer? It's not accurate enough.
Right.
And so this is an IP play, and it's a really actually clever technology. It's basically error correcting codes. But I don't want to bore your audience with that. But if you look at
that's right. I can think of immediately in terms of legal ramifications. If the police collected a sample that was too small to test, and then they used this technology to amplify it to create a larger sample and claim that it was the same as the original sample, I can see the defense jumping in with an expert saying errors introduced.
To my knowledge, that no one's used that as a defense so far, because this 99% accuracy is usually quite good enough to verify these things, because your longer stretches. Anyway, so those are the three. And then there's a forklift tracking company where they mount a smartphone. So forklift, have you ever driven a forklift?
Yes, I actually did once.
Okay. Well, forklifts have a metal safety cage over the top where the driver is, because drivers have a death wish and they want to drop big pallets of stuff.
Drop heavy shit on yourself all the time. Yeah, exactly.
So that's what the safety cage is for. So you mount the smartphone on the underside of the safety cage with a fisheye lens, and you monitor the video and the 9-axis accelerometer. Anytime something happens, you send an email to the human manager of the warehouse. Right. So imagine a 1 million square foot warehouse with 80 or 100 forklifts running around. If something really drastic happens, you learn about it. But something less drastic, you might not know. And so, so this technology reduces the error rate of, accident rate by 75% or more, because now the human manager is aware of things.
Right.
So, awesome. Okay, stop. That's 4 of the 9 that I have.
Fine positivity. So
there you go.
Sadly, I don't think we found anything to disagree with, which means that we will have to do this again.
All right.
Probe more deeply, like a dentist looking for a root canal that has not shown itself yet.
That sounds excellent. Well, Chris, I appreciate you sleeping in late. So that you could start at 11 a.m. and I could start at 8 a.m. here.
I appreciate you taking the effort, especially because we are like at 22 degrees here in Central Florida, which to us might as well be negative. Might as well be absolute zero for our ability to take it. So we're not going out.
My last real cold temperature experience was -8 Fahrenheit one morning in Hokkaido, Japan, on a photography trip in February 2023.
That's too cold.
All right, Chris, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Benjamin Slivka, everybody. I'll put the link to his Substack below. You can read more of this smart stuff. And for my regular listeners and everybody else, please turn off the mainstream media who are lying to you and tune into Messy Times.